right now. So yeah, welcome again, everyone. And thank you so much for being here, Miigwech, and Miigwech, Mary and Mark, for being willing to spend an hour with us.
Miigwech Caitlin, we're glad to be here. I'm Mary McConnell and
Mark McConnell. I'm from Fond du Lac. My family was originally from Wisconsin Point.
And Caitlin asked us if we would talk about tending our medicine and perennial gardens. And the first thing I want to say is that we consider our whole piece of property here as our medicine garden, because we even consider the vegetables that we grow as food as medicine, because they provide that gift of keeping us healthy and able to go out and do the things we are. So they are indeed medicine plants to us. So I'll turn it over to Mark and let him offer comments.
Yeah, one of the things that I thought about right off the get-go is, we didn't come on here to pat ourselves on the back for the work that we do. We're here to pat the plants and the things that grow out there and the things that they give us. They're our relatives. We want to pat them on the back for taking care of us and giving us everything that we need. And it's pretty awesome where we live. Our property borders Patterson Park, south of Superior, and it's just an awesome place. A lot of wild edibles. When I was a kid living in Superior, my grandma used to put a list together, and me and my grandpa would go out to Wisconsin Point and out Billings Drive, and we'd gather those medicines, those things that my grandma had put on the list. And over the years, with both invasive species and industrial pollution and things, a lot of those plants have disappeared. And what used to take a half a day to gather that list of plants could now take weeks and weeks to even find some of those things. So we've been involved with some different projects. One of them was the Power of the Plants project. And the idea of it was trying to see if we could plant some of these plants back in a sustained semi-agricultural setting. And some did really, really good. Some are doing great to this day. Some didn't like it at all, like wild roses did not like being planted anywhere but out in the forest someplace or along a roadway. But things like our wild ginger and wheat, sweet flag, fiddlehead ferns, things of that nature, we were able to get transplant in areas around here, and they've done really, really well, along with the other plants that we have.
This guy just talked about taking fiddle fern. Oh, sorry.
Sue taking over the airwaves again.
I have some pictures and a little short PowerPoint to show some of the stuff that we've done, and then we'll just open it up for questions and talk a little bit about how we separate things and take them out in the fall. Okay, our medicine garden. Well, let me find the next slide. There it is. The Power of the Plants, Preserving the Power of the Plants grant was through UWS, and Paul Helinus, a professor over there, because the species were becoming fewer and some were even disappearing, he came up with this idea to see if native medicinal and edible plants could be grown in a cultivated setting. We had a little bit of talk about that. And if you take those wild plants and put them in a garden setting in a cultivated bed, are you really Are you changing the nature? Are you asking those plants to change what they are and the gifts they give? So we kind of, over time, it became about growing them in a permaculture setting, more natural to their native needs and wants, so that they didn't change. And it was 7 different test sites at Four Corners Elementary School in Superior, Fond du Lac, LCO, Red Cliff, Bad River, and Ashland Visitor Center, and at our farm. This is the Four Corners 2nd grade class planting wild roses. And as Mark said before, the wild roses don't care much for being in a raised garden bed and being mulched. They didn't do so well, but all around that bed, in the edges of the tall grass and the shrubs, there were wild roses sprouting up everywhere, doing very well. So they just kind of like to be left alone to do their own thing. This is Atlantic white cedar that we nurseryed in at our farm.
Original 14, 15 feet tall.
And now it's gotten huge. What hasn't gotten transplanted, a lot of these went to different sites to be put in areas where the cedar was disappearing. This is white sage, the prairie sage that the kids at Four Corners put in, and they harvested it for tea. Let's see if I can get this to go. There we go. We were also involved with the medicine garden at the Harrison Community Center. They built their garden in the shape of a circle. There's 4 different sections of the circle, the turtle's back, and 3 different tiers. And they put sage, sweetgrass, tobacco in there. And then in the head and the tail, they wanted to put cedar, but cedar becomes a tree that is, 30, 40 feet tall. So it wasn't exactly an ideal spot. So they chose to plant them along the fence line at the back. This is a cultivated, semi-cultivated section that we put in at our farm, and it has leeks, wild ginger, jack-in-the-pulpit, wintergreen, trout lily, Dutchman's breeches, and fiddlehead ferns. Certain plants like to grow together, and they do much better when their companion plants are planted with them. They have little friends and neighbors and communities that they just love to be in. This is that same garden 2 years later. And as you can see around it, there are other things that are coming up that we have just kind of let go. And we go in every couple of years and harvest Wabus Ojibwe to kind of thin it out to keep it from overtaking, and harvest the wild raspberries and wild ginger. This is a trout lily, edible and medicinal properties. This is the ginger bed that we put in. And now that is so thick, when it comes up, you can't see any of the soil. That's the fall of the first year it was planted. This is the white sage that we put in. White sage does very well if you don't overwater it or overlove it to death. This is fireweed that grew in a gravel pile out in our far field. Sometimes that if you just look around, you have all these medicine plants that are around you that are there to help you out. This is boneset, which came up in a patch of canary reed grass just spontaneously, that keeps coming back every year and growing more and more. Yarrow, which is another one that comes up in the field for us. This is what happens when you let things just go. The squirrels planted the sunflowers, and the anise hyssop seeded out everywhere in the blueberry plant here and all over. There's 4 blueberry bushes in this that you can't see because of the hyssop. This is our field, and back over in this corner is where the fireweed comes up. And that's a squash, Gitigaan squash that we put in.
All planted in hay bales.
That's the 833 pounds of squash that we harvested from that field. Those 2 are medicine. And whoop, we always start out offering a sema. One of the biggest things to do is to get to know that the plants that you're wanting to put in and what kind of medicine garden that you want. You want to know whether they like wet feet. You want to know whether they like just sandy soil without much organic material in it. You want to know what kind of sunshine they like, or whether they need some shade. And you really need to learn about the plants, and if you listen to them, they will tell you what they need. Also, take care of the earth where you live, and that will help these plants as well. Ask your elders about the relatives and the stories of them. And then in the fall, or at the right time of the season, if your plants are producing and growing and spreading, share them. Share them, the medicine, with other people, your community, your family. Also share the plants so that they can spread and grow more and more. I will put this one back up towards the end. Whoops. Where'd it go? This is a really good place to get medicinal and edible, native to this area wild plants. Sheila Coughlin does really good work and really understands the plants and grows them well. So that's all for this slide. But again, it's those questions that you have. What do you want to do? You know, we got involved with the preserving the power of the plants partially in a way to explain that the woods aren't just lumber, that this is a whole family of our relatives out there that we have this relationship with, and that it needs to be respected and not just treated as woods to be cut down for firewood, that there's this whole community there that we should have respect for and learn about, because there's plants that will keep you alive. There are plants that will help you cure different sicknesses. There are plants that do both, and it's just beautiful. We really need to work to help protect that. To you, Mark?
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to talk about was one of the first things I did was I bought a really good pair of pruning shears and a real good pair of Fisker scissors. And when I go out and I harvest, I was taught by my grandpa when I was a kid that there's a right way and a wrong way to harvest. And I want to cover a couple of them. One is the Gitigaan, the red Ocean Dogwood. I was taught when you go out and you harvest that and you cut it straight off, perpendicular with the ground, as close to the ground as you can. And it will keep growing out of that stem. Sometimes stuff that I've cut last year in the early spring of last year, already later this summer, had 12, 14 shoots coming up out of it. One of the other things is when you get up to a spot on the branch where it gets so small, if you cut that branch at a 45, that little tiny little branch there, if you take that branch and cut it at a 45 and stick it back into the soil, it'll grow. It'll grow back into within a couple of years, one this size. So that's one of the things about a Gitigaan. You know, I've watched people go out and they gather that red osier dogwood, and they just walk along and they're clipping the stems and stuff off and leaving them just drop on the ground, or they take them home and clean them. But if you take those and snip them off and stick them back in the ground, they'll sprout, they'll grow. And one of the other ones I'd like to talk about is Muskego bog, that swamp tea that we gather and use a lot. I know I've gathered it a lot for people. I know Caitlin's gathered it for people. She's gathered some for me. People that are on any, you know, all these different cancer treatments. It really, really, really helps them with keeping their food down after that treatment. It settles their stomach, really helps them out. But I've watched people over the years, and I was always taught to clip that plant with a snipper or a scissor, clip it straight off. And I have a spot where I've been gathering that for years and years and years, and I don't even have to bend over anymore. I can just walk through there and gather it right at chest height. That's how high it's growing. But sometimes I see people, they grab a hold of the stem and they just rip the leaves off. And if you go back a year or 2 years later, that's all you have is a bunch of dead stems there, and that plant, that bog plant gets stifled. So, you know, the things that my grandpa taught me when I was a little kid, for sure they're true, because a lot of these plants love to be trimmed. They love to be pruned. They love to be used in a good way. And when you do it in a good way, it's really, really healthy for not only yourself, but for the plant also. And it just makes so much sense, you know, to do it in a good way and sustain that area where you like to go harvest Gitigaan or Muskego bog, whatever plant it is. Wild leeks is another one. I always take, if you're going to dig the bulb of the leek up, if you have a nice big clump of wild leeks, only take just a few of them out of that clump. We talk about that 1 in 25 rule. There should be 25 of something before you take one. And that's so that's sustainable. But if you have a sharp knife and you cut that little bit of root off the end like you do on an onion, and stick that back in the dirt, and take your foot and press the dirt tight around that. In a couple of years, that leek will come right back up and grow again because you left that root there. Most of our plants, I was listening, Mary was listening to an elder talk on a Zoom meeting the other night, and I found what he said very, very interesting, and it's true. You can take a lot of our different plants and you can bring them home and you can hang them up and dry them. But even after they're dry, if you put them in good, clean water, they will come back to life again. So I thought that was pretty amazing, but true. The red osier dogwood, it's asleep right now. You go out and harvest it, but if you take that and push it back in the ground, when the sun gets to it this spring, even if you can't get it into the dirt, because when I went out and gathered this, I was able to get it about an inch into the ground. The ground wasn't really froze solid, but just get it in the ground enough to where it can start putting that root out from that stem. It'll survive, it'll make it. And the deer have decimated my red osier dogwood this year. The tops are just gone off of it. So they're in February and in January, they had some pretty tough times, and the animals know those plants that they need, you know. So they were browsing really, really heavy on that. Luckily, they didn't get into my nursery stock cedar trees that I know of yet, but if they did, so be it. And that's the other thing, plant, you know, if you're gonna plant stuff, plant what you need and a little bit, you know, a little bit extra for the creatures, because they're our relatives too, and they may need it.
Are there any questions out there that anybody wants answered about particular plants? No?
And yeah, you can
One of those weeds that grows along
Oh, wait a
one of
minute.
those weeds that grows along your driveway that's real fuzzy, the Western tribes call it rabbit tobacco. Campers a lot of times will use it for toilet paper because it's really fuzzy on both sides. Kids like it, but it makes an awesome, awesome medicine for upper respiratory and things that we think are weeds or even invasive species, like what grows out in our field here, the
Valerian.
valerian. Wisconsin and Minnesota both have put them on their primary eradication list. You know, we got to get rid of it, but yet it's a really, really strong medicine. Sometimes it boggles my mind that, you know, if they don't understand it, get rid of it, destroy it. But there's so many different uses for these things.
I see Haley Anderson had a question. You have this eroding bluff. That red osier dogwood that we were just talking about is really good for stabilizing erosion on bluff areas, on streams, shores, lines, because of the fact that if you take just that cutting and stick it in, it will root out. And there are even programs where they've gone out and cut branches of red osier dogwood, and they tie like 3 or 4, no, I think it's 12 per bundle at odd angles, and go and stick them in the bank and wet them. And as it roots, it stabilizes the ground area that it's in. So that is one really good thing. The other thing you could do is use like a clover as a ground cover to begin with, and kind of help build up the soil a little bit. Ask at your local garden centers, or Sheila Coughlin would know, or you could go out and harvest it, the branches themselves, and just soak them in water and then plant them, stick them down in the soil where you are, and see if that doesn't help to stabilize them. Mary Lou.
Mary Lou, you have your hand raised. Did you want to ask a question?
Hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, what is the name of that, or not? What do you use that one plant that grows in the corner of your garden that kind of got pink on it? And you said it grows wild. It was in one of your,
Oh,
Earth.
the fireweed.
yes. What do
They
you
use that to make it. They use it to make a tea to boost your immune system. If you're getting a cold, if you're getting the flu, an early spring tonic for clearing out. And you use the flowers and the leaves and the branches, you chop it up and make it dry tea out of it, and steep it in boiling water and drink it.
It makes a really good poultice for removing removing a really bad splinter also. It'll pull that splinter right out of your hand or wherever you have a bad splinter.
I will put the link for the local supplier up again just before you leave as the last slide, and put that back up so everybody can see it.
Thank you.
I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it did.
The other thing that we
You can
do,
make jelly out of it too.
safe foraging, air, water pollution. If you're wild foraging, you want to make sure that the area that you're in isn't right along a roadway
Or
Isn't-
railroad track.
or railroad tracks or places where you know that the water is polluted or that there are sprays or it's an old factory site. Or where people throw garbage a lot around the edges of your garbage dumps and things like that. You just have to be really well aware of where you're at and the types of activities that go on in that area as far as foraging. And sometimes it can be really a problem in areas like St. Paul and Minneapolis, or even in Duluth. Sometimes you have to go a little ways out on the edges of the city to find a place to get things that haven't been polluted.
Yeah, you know, we are what we eat and what we consume into our bodies, and plants are no different. They, you know, if it's too close to a roadway that's been sprayed, you know, even 10, 15 years ago, those residuals get picked up by these plants. So you need to be really, really careful. I try and get as far off the beaten path as I possibly can when I wild gather and wild forage.
One of the things that we do about sharing our perennial and medicine gardens is both spring and fall, when things are coming awake and you see that maybe your catmint has taken over this whole bed that you've got it in, and it's kind of overshadowing everything else. Is I go in and I take and cut out chunks of that big clump of catmint, leave one main piece, and then I pot up those other pieces to share with other people. And the same thing with the wild ginger. We take out sections of it and split it up and pot it up, and just to be able to share that. You can do that with any of them. I have evening primrose, which grows like crazy, and I have to constantly separate it and sort it out. Not so much with tobacco. That's kind of a self-seeding annual. It will grow well up here. It will seed itself back. And so I haven't had to start any seed in 3 or 4 years, because there's Asema coming up everywhere in my vegetable garden beds, next to the compost, in the middle of the walkways between, inside my high tunnel, in some of the outer beds. And we just take and transplant those into pots and give some of them away and put some of them where we want to grow. Wild ginger grows well in shady areas. Sweetgrass will take some shade. White sage will take some shade. I suggest that you do a little research on shady native medicinal plants, and that will give you some suggestions, because there are so many of them. Trout lily, leeks do well in some shade. Wild violets will do well in shade, not solid shade, but patchy shade. And they all tend to grow together. Fiddlehead ferns, which people think of only as edible, but they do have some medicinal qualities to them.
You want to cover this one too? The wood chip, light wood chip.
You also want to be careful if you're putting in a garden per se, a perennial, or even a cultivated medicine garden with sweetgrass or a sema, or even if you're putting in a pollinator garden with hyssop. If your plants are very, very small, or you're just starting with seed and the plants come up and you want to mulch them to keep down weeds, you want to be very careful with that, because a light mulch too thick and the plants will have to really, really struggle to get up above the mulch to where they can get their full sunlight if it's a sunny area. And some of them, like the sage, they have shoots that come out to the side, and the sweetgrass too. It grows like grass. It sends out a root and then comes up next to it. And so if you've got a couple inches of mulch, it has to make its way all the way through that heavy mulch. And if it's really light wood chips, like pine, and really light color, it can make the sunlight too intense and actually hurt them. So we did that at the Harrison Center. They put in a pollinator garden as well, and they mulched it with about 3 inches of white pine, and it didn't do well at all. Not only did the plants struggle to thrive, but then the following year, most of them did not return. So.
Yeah, somebody put on there, Christina, about harvesting in the state parks and the forestry center. There used to be a spot over in Jay Cook Park. I used to go and see, there was just a massive amount of wild leeks growing there, wild ramps. And within a period of 2 or 3 years, that whole area got dug and decimated. And and that's that problem with that. I would see little bundles of them at the Whole Foods Co-op in Duluth, $7 for 6 or 7 little ramp with the leaf and the bulb, and people would go out and just decimate them. And we need to be aware of how and where we go and how we harvest. Do it responsibly and take care of it. If it takes, if we take care of it, it'll take care of us.
And some of your medicine gardens just happen spontaneously as well, because I have an area that I put landscape fabric down, and I put about 2 inches of gravel down, and that was so I could set big pots on it with tomato plants and peppers and things in it, and not have to worry about weeds. And pretty soon, one of the pots of mint seeded over into the gravel. And then all of a sudden I had wild strawberries coming up out of nowhere. I didn't put them in there, just sprouting in the gravel. So for a while I had a strawberry mint garden. And now I have wild raspberries that have come up and have just taken over the majority of it. And so now I have a strawberry mint raspberry garden, which is okay, because I like to gather the raspberry leaves to make tea for medicines. And the only thing I do is try and keep as much of the quack grass from getting in there as I can. But I prefer to see what's there and what comes and just kind of work with it instead of trying to make it what I think it should be.
Don't overlove it. Yeah, you can, if you're a band member, you can harvest anywhere within any of the ceded territories, 1837, 42, 54. The only one that I know that you need a tribal permit on your piece of paper is for ginseng. All the other plant life you're allowed to harvest. for your own use.
Andre wanted to know if we have any tips for propagating tree trimmings, specifically when to cut the trimmings and how to plant them and use of root growth. Generally in the spring, if you're gonna be doing it for propagation, you want to do it almost now because they're starting to wake up. And if it gets much warmer than this, then where you've cut the branches, you have the chance of insects getting in and infecting the tree. And I've never used growth hormone, so I don't have any tips on that. I know people who do, and they just follow the directions. It would depend on the plant. Some need growth hormones, other just need to be put in water. Elderberry is one of those that water or wet sawdust and they will root out to be. Raspberries the same way. They will, and I consider them a tree because they get pretty feisty now and then. But the red osier dogwood, you would just really have to look at the specific tree that you are wanting to propagate and do a little research on what some of the best methods are and timing, because some trees are early in the spring, some are in the fall. And some you can do with air rooting right on the tree and get it to root inside a container or sphagnum moss prior to cutting it to propagate it.
One of the things also is always remember that there's that plant you're looking for, like Mushiga, for instance. That one that will help your stomach, settle your stomach. Also, it's got a slight narcotic effect where it kind of gives you a little pick-me-up. But right next to it's another plant that will keep you stuck in the bathroom for a couple of days, called leather leaf. It has the opposite effect. So in a lot of foraging, wild foraging, there's that plant that you're looking for that's helpful, but there's a look-alike that grows generally very, very close to it that isn't good for you. Some of them are harmful, some can be deadly. Always remember that. It's like going out and picking mushrooms. You know, if you're just a average Joe and you want to go out and pick mushrooms, I would say go with somebody that's knowledgeable. You can get there's some really, really good books out there for mushroom harvesting that have good color pictures. I took a couple of courses at UWS and I'm still not confident. I wish I had listened to my grandfather, who was an avid mushroom picker. And I wish I had listened to him, but as a little kid, you know, you're off, you know, swinging from the branches of the trees. Yeah, always know what you're gathering. You know, and always remember there's that look-alike that looks almost exactly like the one that you're after. That might not be so good.
For Alice, if you have bear in the area, are there plants that we should avoid? If you're wanting to plant them in your yard, you don't want to plant any of their favorite foods because that will encourage them to come closer into your yard, such as strawberries and blueberries and blackberries. But if you're out harvesting, you should always use caution anyway. I don't know that there are plants that you should avoid, but if you're berry picking, so are the bears.
Or singing.
So you want to make sure that you're cautious and that you're aware of your surroundings and respectful, because some of that stuff is there for the bears to eat.
Yep.
not just for our use. So,
When we were younger, we went gathering with some elders and they sang the whole time, even when they'd sit down and pick blueberries and stuff, they were singing the whole time they were out harvesting. And it was so awesome. Then we went ricing with them. Actually, it was the first time we went ricing. And we were on one side of the lake and they were on the other side of the lake. They were just singing up a storm, and it was so awesome to hear that.
no, we don't know when morels start to pop because we don't go and gather mushrooms, so we haven't really paid attention to it. One of the things I want to say is when you're gathering, even from your own medicine garden, from your own yard, as well as in the woods, always be mindful. If you're out away from your house, yeah, you need to make sure that if you're on somebody's private property that you have permission to be there. But more importantly, you need to ask and put out that asema to ask those plants if it's okay that you take them. And also, as a thank you for the gifts, only harvest what you need. If you find a big patch, don't go crazy. Take only what you need and leave more to propagate and more to share with people. If we over harvest, they go away. If we forget to use them, if we forget to acknowledge these plants and the gifts they give us, they will go away. They come when we need them. And if we don't, they go somewhere where they're needed and appreciated. It's this relationship. These literally are living beings that we have this working relationship with.
And Francois is a good one. You're right, Caitlin. Francois is a really good one. He's very knowledgeable. I've learned not to follow him down the road because he'll be heading somewhere to forage, and all of a sudden on come the brakes and he comes to a dead stop. Out of the car he goes and into the woods. So yeah, if you go foraging with Francois and you're not riding with him, don't follow too close. But he's very, very knowledgeable about shrooms. Yeah, Lyme's disease. There's another one. Everybody know what sweet fern is? It grows in sandy country. Down over here by us, it grows just a little bit south here and over by Iron River, Brule area. You can take that and tie a couple of twigs of that on your pant legs. You can take and harvest some of that and rub it between your hands and rub it on your arms and things. The ticks do not like it.
Julie, when I'm out harvesting fiddleheads, if the plant only has 4 heads coming up, I won't take any from it. If it has 7 or 8, I will take 3 from that plant. And then you go back a few days later and all of a sudden from the base of that one that had 4, there's a couple of more coming up. Then you can harvest 1 or 2, but I only, if there's only 6, I may only take 1 head off of that plant and go on to the next. But I'm usually harvesting leeks and fiddleheads and trout lily flowers and violets all in the same trip. So, because they all tend to grow together. Just make sure it's a fiddlehead and not an interrupted fern because they look very similar. And one is edible and the interrupted fern is not. The fiddlehead, the ostrich fern, is edible. There again, you have the look-alike. Always make sure if you're wild harvesting that you do know how to identify the plants.
We go to a place that generally in the spring gets flooded really, really, really heavy when the snow melts. And every time we've gone there, we've come across the bulb of the Fiddlehead Burn. The dirt around it has been washed away, and they went down the river with the flood, and they got deposited on the river banks. And we went one year and gathered up a 5-gallon bucket of those and brought them back and planted them, and they're doing really, really good.
I'm going to share my screen, Caitlin. So if another question comes up, can you watch? And that way they can copy the info for Sheila.
Somebody asked if we propagated fiddleheads. Yeah, the fiddlehead fern, the bulb part of it's a round bulb that it grows up out of. And if you can find them dislodged already because of a flood, if they have not totally dried out or rotted, you can take them and replant them and they'll come back to life just gangbusters.
I can't see the gallery, so you have to let me know. If there's anything else.
I was giving people some time to write down the details. Would anyone want to speak out loud outside of the recording? I always like to offer that option in the last few minutes if people would want me to stop the recording. And you can let me know, I guess, in the chat right now, since I can't really see the gallery very well. But is anyone interested in that? Talking a little bit without recording?
There you go. It's in the chat.
Okay, so for the recording of Miigwech, Mary, and Mark for sharing all your knowledge and everyone for your questions. And we'll see you next week.